This deals with pages 148 to 153. I asked, in regard to Aryeh Kaplan's commentary on the Sefer Yetzirah, feel free to discuss this in terms of other Kabbalistic texts. Don't make up fanciful, verbose answers. Please take the following textual material. Extract all of the Hebrew/Kabbalistic terms and define them. And, not just Hebrew/Kabbalistic terms, if there is a concept the author is presenting, please define that too. However, please don't redefine the basic 10 Sephirot, just define the Kabbalistic terms beyond that. If you can look back at all of my previous conversations with you, please don't duplicate definitions of terms. Take all of the mentioned biblical quotes, search and provide the KJV quotes and provide a brief contextual explanation of each of the quotes, 2 or 3 sentences. If Talmudic/Zoharic or other Kabbalistic quotes are referenced, please go ahead and find those quotes also. Here are the responses. Hebrew/Kabbalistic terms. Mayim, water. Literally water. In Sefer Yetzirah, Mayim represents the primordial element of water, one of the 3 mothers, Aleph, Mem, Shin. Water symbolizes receptivity, hidden potential, formation, gestation, and undifferentiated substance. Kaplan points out that Mem derives its very name from Mayim, emphasizing the intimate relationship between the letter and the element. Mem. Although one of the 3 mother letters already discussed elsewhere, Kaplan here emphasizes 2 additional ideas. The closed Mem symbolizes containment, unity, hiddenness, enclosure. Unlike Shin, expansion, or Aleph, equilibrium, Mem encloses. Its pronunciation also closes the lips completely, mirroring the symbolic idea of containment. Aver, air. Literally air. In Kabbalah, Aver is the intermediate state between fire and water. It often represents breath, spirit, equilibrium, transmission, the invisible medium through which life acts. In later Lurianic Kabbalah, Aver also acquires highly technical meanings concerning the primordial vacuum, Kalal, and subtle divine radiance, but Sefer Yetzirah uses it primarily as the balancing middle element. Masha, / depending on arrangement. Kaplan describes the sequence. Mem. Aleph. Shin. As representing the yearly cycle. Winter. Temperate seasons. Summer. Rather than merely naming 3 elements, the letters become a symbolic cycle of oscillation between opposites. Cycle as king over time. This is one of the major philosophical concepts in this passage. The Sefer Yetzirah views time itself as cyclical rather than linear. The movement is fire air water air fire, or hot temperate cold temperate hot. Time is therefore measured not merely by duration but by recurring balanced transitions. This anticipates later Kabbalistic ideas of ascent/descent, contraction/expansion, emanation/return, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Kaplan uses these modern philosophical terms to explain the text. They are not original Kabbalistic terminology. He uses them to illustrate summer, winter, temperate balance. This is an explanatory framework rather than a historical doctrine. Ravayot. This is probably the most important new term in this section. Usually it means abundance, fullness, saturation, satisfaction. Kaplan argues that within Sefer Yetzirah it uniquely means temperateness, or perfect equilibrium. Rather than abundance alone, Ravayah becomes the balanced state between opposing extremes. Psychologically, fire equals excess sensation. Water equals deficient sensation. Raviat equals healthy equilibrium. Urat. The early rains. These are the autumn rains that begin Israel's agricultural cycle. Some commentators derive Raviat from Urat, connecting temperateness with a season that restores balance after summer heat. Microcosm. An extremely important Kabbalistic doctrine. The human being reflects the entire structure of creation. Thus, human body, soul, Sephirotic structure, cosmos. This idea appears repeatedly throughout Sefer Yetzirah, early Merkava mysticism, the Zohar, Cordovero, Luria, supernal man, often called Adam Elyon, upper man, in later Kabbalah. This does not refer to God possessing a physical form. Rather, the entire arrangement of the Sephirot is symbolically portrayed as a human figure. This symbolic form later becomes known as parts of Adam Kadmon. Although Sefer Yetzirah predates that terminology. Anthropomorphic representation. Kaplan is careful here. The Sephirot are represented as though they formed a human body. This is symbolic. It provides a way of visualizing relationships among divine attributes without implying corporeality. Two covenants. Mentioned earlier in Sefer Yetzirah. They are covenant of the tongue, Brit Halashon. Covenant of circumcision, Brit Milah. Abulafia connects them through the heart. Thus, head, speech, heart, Torah, belly, circumcision. This forms a vertical mystical axis. Heart as king over the soul. Another symbolic teaching. The heart mediates between thought and generation. Spiritually it represents balance, rulership, integration, rather than emotion alone. Creative vs. receptive powers. Kaplan interprets head, fire, creative, belly, water, receptive, chest, air, exchange. This reflects one of the central triadic structures of Sefer Yetzirah, Chakma consciousness. Kaplan distinguishes mystical states associated with Chakma from ordinary awareness. Characteristics include intuitive knowing, direct perception, pre-verbal awareness, subconscious cognition. Some later ecstatic Kabbalists attempted to enter this state through meditation. Bina consciousness. Contrasted with Chakma. Characteristics. Conceptual thought. Analysis. Differentiation. Articulate awareness. Kaplan associates ordinary conscious thinking with Bina. Controlled breathing. Breathing becomes a mystical bridge. Since respiration is partly voluntary and partly involuntary, it links conscious and subconscious. This becomes central in the meditation systems of Rabbi Abraham Abulafia, where regulated breathing accompanies letter permutations and divine name contemplation. Gaviyat normally means body, corpse, physical form. Kaplan notes that Sefer Yetzirah uniquely employs it to mean the chest or the trunk. The unusual usage is supported through Ezekiel's vision. He made Aleph king. This recurring formula throughout Sefer Yetzirah means much more than assigning authority. Mystically it means the letter becomes the governing spiritual principle within a specific domain of creation. Kaplan also connects this with the association of the operative letter to Malkut, the point of manifestation. Bound a crown to it. This phrase has multiple layers. 1. The letter becomes linked upward toward Keter. 2. The physical Hebrew letters possess ornamental crowns, Tagin. 3. Spiritually, the crowns represent a higher level of reality than the written letter itself. Tagin. The tiny ornamental crowns written atop certain Hebrew letters in Torah scrolls. The Talmud teaches that Moses saw God attaching these crowns before the Torah was given. Mystically they symbolize transcendent meanings hidden beyond the written letters. Reflected breath. Kaplan contrasts direct breath with reflected breath. Direct breath flows downward from Keter. Reflected breath is the return movement expressed through speech and manifestation. This anticipates later Kabbalistic ideas of returning light, or Hoser, though the terminology here is earlier. Asiyah. The world of action. Kaplan briefly alludes to the traditional four worlds. Letters written physically belong to Asiyah. Their crowns connect them upward into Yetzirah. Yetzirah. The world of formation. In this context, Tagin connect the physical letters of Asiyah to their formative spiritual prototypes in Yetzirah. Hidden divine name Avyh. Kaplan notes that replacing the resh in Aver with he produces Avyh. This is treated as an esoteric divine name. Unlike the Tetragrammaton, it appears only in mystical traditions and belongs to the doctrine of hidden names used in contemplative Kabbalah rather than public liturgy. Biblical quotations. Psalm 23:5, KJV. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies, thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Context. David describes God's abundant provision even amid danger. Kaplan notes that the Hebrew word translated runneth over is raviah, whose ordinary meaning is abundance or overflowing satisfaction. Some Kabbalists associate this verse symbolically with the 221 gates because of the imagery of overflowing divine fullness. Psalm 66:12, KJV. Thou hast caused men to ride over our heads, we went through fire and through water, but thou broughtest us out into a wealthy place. Context. The psalm recounts Israel's trials followed by divine deliverance. The Hebrew phrase translated wealthy place is l'raviah. Kaplan argues that in the context of Sefer Yetzirah, raviah can be understood as a state of balance or temperateness between the extremes of fire and water, rather than merely material abundance. Ezekiel 1:11, KJV. Thus were their faces, and their wings were stretched upward, 2 wings of every one were joined one to another, and 2 covered their bodies. Context. This verse is part of Ezekiel's inaugural vision of the heavenly chariot, Merkava. Kaplan notes that the Hebrew word gaviyah, body, may, in this context, specifically denote the chest, providing scriptural support for the unusual usage in Sefer Yetzirah. The covering of the chest also underscores the awe and sanctity of the celestial beings. Rabbinic references. Talmud Psalm 66:12, Fire and Water. Kaplan cites the Talmud's interpretation that fire and water describe contrasting human conditions rather than only literal ordeals. The passage understands them as metaphorical experiences of suffering through which a person is refined before reaching Raviyah, a state of relief or fulfillment. Midrash Psalm 66:12. The Midrash expands the image of fire and water into opposing forms of purgatorial judgment. Kaplan uses this to illustrate the broader Kabbalistic principle that opposing forces are ultimately reconciled in a balanced middle state. Talmud Moses and the crowns on the letters. The cited passage is Babylonian Talmud, Menachot 2:9b. When Moses ascended on high, he found the Holy One, blessed be he, sitting and tying crowns to the letters. Context. Moses asks why these crowns are necessary. God replies that a future sage, Rabbi Akiva, will derive heaps and heaps of laws from each tiny crown. In Kabbalah, this episode becomes foundational for the doctrine that every detail of the written Torah, even the ornamental tagin, contains hidden layers of divine wisdom. This concludes coverage of terms from pages 148 to 153.